Welcome to Hood Champion Boxing and Sports. In boxing, you find a way to win or you find a way to lose. Say it ain't so. Say it ain't so. Is Jaron Ennis putting duck sauce on the fried rice? Is Jaron Boots Ennis for real? Is he running from what the young boys say, from the smoke? And make sure you like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Leave that donation for that fried rice and check your wings. Yo, we need answers, man. Now, we know there's a lot going on out here at 147. That shit is just getting shook up left and right, man. But I do think, as far as Eddie Hearn, Jaron Ennis, Brian Norman Jr. is no longer a top priority. Does that make it a duck? Does that mean there's duck sauce on the fried rice? Does that mean they're avoiding him? Does that mean they're scared? I'll put it to you this way. Brian Norman Jr.'s got to fight June 19th against Jin Sasaki. In Japan, you can probably make some good money. They're just trying to line up a unification to get something, the conversation's going with Jaron Ennis. Jaron Ennis has to fight Giasov, right? Giasov is his mandatory. Now, the thing about that is, after Jaron Ennis fulfills his WBA mandatory, you got Lewis Crocker for the IBF mandatory to Jaron Ennis. We know the IBF and WBO, they don't be playing around. But for me, I wonder if Eddie Hearn and Jaron Ennis are like, look, let's take care of these mandatories. It should be a much easier fruit for us to pick. And then we can wait and see what happens between Barrios and Pacquiao. Because Hearn is Hearn's got Conor Ben, he's got Jaron Ennis. They could sit there and say, you know what, we'd rather go against Pacquiao if Pacquiao beats Barrios. Because he's a legend. But if Barrios beats Pacquiao, well then Barrios would probably could be an easier fight because Barrios is a bad boy, but he's just been fighting for so long and has so much wear and tear on him. I think Boots has a good chance to beat him. So then they could, Eddie Hearn and Boots and his team could be like, shit, then we'll have 3 belts. We'll have got through our mandatories, picked up 3 belts, and then we'll go and make sure that we're the A side and bully Brian Norman Jr. into an undisputed distinction. But this is where Brian Norman Jr., I don't know what he's going to make, but I wouldn't be surprised if he made over $1 million fighting over there in Japan. And I think if he has to fight a couple more times, depending on who he fights, and he could keep winning, well then his value is going to increase. But the bottom line is, I think Hearn is going to ensure he locks in another fight for Jaron Ennis, other than Brian Norman Jr. I think Brian Norman Jr. and his dad are going to have to lock in some other fights for him. You know what I'm saying? The bottom line is, when I look at Eddie Hearn and Team Boots and Brian Norman Jr. and his team, it just seems to me like, although it's gamesmanship and promoting, it's just some muddying of the water and tarnishing names that's going on. You know what I'm saying? But the bottom line is, one thing I hope does not happen is they don't do these public negotiations anymore. Like, keep the talks behind closed doors. You want to say someone's been offered a fortune, cool. But when I just think they dropped the ball. Brian Norman Jr. and his team coming out with the numbers and trying to break down the numbers, because 95% of people out here on social media, they can't perform simple math and shit. You know what I mean? And I think that backfired because people saw them as wanting more than their market value, which, like I always say, if Eddie Hearn overpaid Charles Martin. So Anthony Joshua could pick up his strap. Why not overpay Brian? Why didn't he overpay Brian Norman Jr. so Boots can go and unify? So it is what it is, man. But let's see what happens next. I want to see what happens next because normally Eddie Hearn likes to have everything, all of his ducks in a row for his fighters. And a guy like Jaron Ennis, I think even Eddie Hearn is kind of reluctant to try to make that Norman Jr. fight. I think he knows Brian Norman Jr. is a more riskier fight than anybody else right now at 147. As a result, it could be given the impression that they're putting some duck sauce on the fried rice. You know what I'm saying? The reality is that they could be trying to get Brian Norman Jr. at a very low price, but I just have a feeling all that shit's going to backfire because I fully expect Brian Norman Jr., I've been saying this, he's going to tranquilize Jin Sasaki. And Sasaki going to fight. In Japan, that energy is different. But if he goes out there and he destroys Sasaki, Brian Norman Jr. and his profile is going to skyrocket, man. Big time. And Norman Jr. is going to be out here, go from that little 1.8 million or whatever it is Eddie Hearn was going to give him. Now you got to look at giving him, upwards of maybe even 5-6 million. It just depends on, how everything plays out, especially if Turki Al-Sheikh gets involved, because when Turkey's in the house every day is Thanksgiving. But I'm interested to see how it goes. Very interested. I just wish Brian Norman Sr., his dad is so emotional when he starts talking. It's hard for me to follow what the dude is saying because he's just an emotional guy, man. And of course, he wants to get something in writing for his son. That way they say, okay, you get past Sasaki, we know who your next fight's going to be. But Eddie Hearn's not going to do nothing stupid like that unless he feels like it benefits him. And trust me, if they start negotiations or having a conversation, Eddie Hearn's going to try to lock him in for something, a low ball offer. And that's just how Eddie Hearn does business. For anyone out here who disagrees, just look at how they did Deontay Wilder back in the day when he and AJ were trying to make a fight. Eddie Hearn was definitely lowballing him. $15 million for Brazil, that was a lot of money at the time. Then $40 million, 2 fights, $40 million each, $80 million, a total of $95 million for 3 fights for Wilder. But they were working with Kinahan, they were getting the money from Saudi, and they would never tell Wilder what Joshua was going to make. Joshua was going to make upwards of $100 million. And see, that's what's horrible about dealing with a guy like Eddie Hearn. Anyway, let's see what happens next. Very, very interesting how all this plays out, especially with Top Rank and, Matchroom, and if, in fact, what's his name's got to get involved, Saudi and Turki Al-Sheikh. Let's see. But hopefully they make it sooner than later because anything can happen in boxing. And I hate to see that Boots loses or Norman Jr. loses, and then now we don't get that fight for a unification for Undisputed. And now we got Boots or Norman Jr. fighting someone else. Or maybe they both lose. And now we got, a guy like Rolly fighting, a Sasaki or some shit. You know what I'm saying? You just never know how things can go in this boxing game. Anyway, keep cool. Jaron Ennis ducking Brian Norman Jr. Could be ducking that fight right now to handle some other business and then come into that fight with 3 belts opposed to the 2 that he has right now. Keep cool. I'm in the breeze.